New data on Americans' reactions to what's happening in the auto industry. First of all, Americans are pretty cognizant of what's happening. We asked the public if they knew if each of three companies, General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford, had declared bankruptcy or not, just as a test to see to what degree Americans were aware of what's happening. Fairly high numbers. 80%, for example, said they were aware that General Motors had declared bankruptcy, and a very low percent said that Ford had declared bankruptcy, which of course is right. So we do know right off the bat that Americans are following the news and are aware of what's happening. That leads to our next series of questions, which is the marketing implications of the bankruptcy. We found about 20% of Americans roughly say they're at least somewhat likely to buy a new car within the next year. So there is a market out there of sorts. But we followed up with the key question: if you know that a company has declared bankruptcy, that is a car company, does that make you more likely or less likely to want to buy a car from that company? You see the numbers in front of you there. Just about half of Americans say that they actually would be less likely to buy a car from that company. That's important because it does suggest that there could be some repercussions to General Motors and perhaps Chrysler of their having declared bankruptcy. By the way, we did look at the difference on this question among those who said they were at least somewhat likely to buy a car versus those who weren't, and there really wasn't much difference. Finally, the political angle of all of this. Do you approve or disapprove of the fact that the U.S. government will have spent about $50 billion on General Motors and will now own 60% of General Motors when the dust settles? You see the numbers there. As we have found previously, over half of Americans say they disapprove, majority disapproval for the government bailout of General Motors and involvement in ownership of General Motors. Again, we found this in the past, but our current data simply reinforce that this could, in theory, be a political liability for the Obama administration, which pushed it, depending, of course, on what happens to the car industry and perhaps to the economy in the months and years ahead. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Editor-in-Chief of the Gallup poll.